Hey guys, it's Tim Sheeser for TechSpot, and this is the Google Nexus 5, the new handset that you can get unlocked for just $349 as made by LG. It contains some top-of-the-line specifications. On the front is a 5-inch 1080p IPS LCD display. Internally, there's a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 system on a chip. There's also a 2300 mAh battery and an 8 megapixel camera. That's a Sony Exmor RS sensor, so we're expecting some good quality shots out of that. It's also optically stabilized. You get 2 gigabytes of RAM, 16 or 32 gigabytes of internal storage, and it's running Android 4.4 KitKat out of the box, which is a new version of Android that's come preloaded on the Google Nexus 5. So before we get straight into the review, there are two things to mention. The first is that you can find an unboxing video of this device when I received it. We'll put a little box there, you can go check that out. And also, this phone was provided to us by Negri Electronics. They do fantastic shipping rates and prices all around the globe. I got this in Australia 2 days after it was ordered, which I think is pretty much fantastic for an American company. So do check them out, negrielectronics.com. First up, we're just going to take a look at the design of this smartphone, and as you'll notice, it's a fairly minimal design that LG has gone for with the front panel here. You'll notice there's the 5-inch display that takes up most of the front. It's got a minimal bezel to the sides, which is great, and it's something that we also saw on the LG G2. It's got about 71% coverage, which is pretty good for a flagship smartphone. Below the display here, you probably can't see it very well because it's not active at the moment, but there is a notification orb there. It's multicolored, but it mostly glows white in Android 4.4. At the top of the phone, we have the front-facing camera, the speaker, that's white because this is a white model, and there's also a sensor array across over there. Flicking the phone around to the back, and you'll notice that this phone is styled very similarly to the Nexus 7 tablet. We've got some significant Nexus branding here that's quite large, and you can view that in landscape mode. It's quite prominent up there. You've also got the LG branding here to designate who produced this smartphone, and up the top we have that 8 megapixel camera surrounded by a pretty significant camera rim. Some people have said this looks kind of bad, but I'm personally indifferent about it. I think it looks quite okay. As I said, this is the white model, and only the back panel of this device is white. Around the edges and stuff, you'll still notice that it's black. I personally think that it looks quite good with the sort of two-tone color switching from white to black. It looks pretty good, and of course you can get that black model if you don't like the white back. I think it's going to get marked. Taking a look around the edges of the device, and we have a volume rocker on the left-hand side. On the top, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack for getting audio out. There's also a microphone right there. On the right hand side here, we have the power button, which you can see at the top, and that's above the SIM card slot. There's no micro SD card slot, so you can't expand the storage beyond 16 or 32 gigabytes, depending on the model you get, but that's just a slight downside. And on the bottom, you'll notice the micro USB charging port as well as for data. And I've got 2 speaker grills. One of these has the speaker, the other one has a microphone behind it. I really quite like the design of the Nexus 5. In fact, I probably like it a little bit more than the Nexus 4 with that sort of weird pattern that they had on the back. Mostly because that panel was a glass panel, and that can shatter. If it's got front and back glass, of course that's sort of a risk. If you're going to drop it, it might shatter, and then you'll have to replace that entire panel. There's no such thing with this device. It's made of polycarbonate. It's quite soft to touch and it feels nice. It doesn't feel too cheap. The edge plastic's a bit glossy, whereas this is sort of your matte finish. But it doesn't feel too cheap. It definitely feels a bit more premium than the price tag would suggest. Of course, $349 or $399, depending on the model you get. The glass front panel is made entirely of Gorilla Glass, so it's quite scratch resistant. It's pretty difficult to break, and it's quite easy to also remove the fingerprints that you get on it when you're sort of using the display normally, and your fingers just sort of glide along here with that fantastic coating that you see on most devices these days. So yeah, overall I'm very happy with the design of the LG G2, but what I'm even more happy about is this absolutely fantastic IPS LCD display which they've gone for here. It's a really fantastic crisp display with great color quality, great contrast, and I'm going to show you a couple of sample images on this display just so you can see how good it is. So flicking through some of these sample shots, you notice that The device is extremely crisp with that 1080p display. You can really notice some of the intricate details, such as here on the fallen wood in this sort of forest. It's significantly improved on 720p displays. We've been talking a lot about 1080p displays over the past year or so when they've been included on flagship devices, and the Nexus 5's display is no different to any of these. It looks absolutely fantastic in terms of crispness. Also, color quality is very good as we're flicking through these images. I noticed that on some test sample patterns and stuff, that green is the most dominant color, but it still looks very good. It's very balanced, not overly vibrant, but it does portray colors accurately, and that's exactly what you're looking for in a device. Again, the contrast is also very good from this panel. It's got deep blacks and also bright whites. It makes looking at text and stuff crisp and clear and really quite good. So overall, I'm very happy with this display, and it definitely isn't the sort of thing that you'd normally get on a device that only costs $349. This is a premium panel. It's better than the panel I saw on the Xperia Z1, and to be honest, I'd be happy with this in any sort of flagship device. It's really very good, and I think you'll be perfectly happy with what LG has used in the Nexus 5. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on the performance of the Snapdragon 800 system on a chip. If you want to check out benchmarks for this device, you can do that in the full review. Links to that will be in the description below. And of course, we've talked a little bit about it in the LG G2 review and also the Sony Xperia Z1 review. Both of these devices also keep the Snapdragon 800 with that 2.3 GHz quad-core CPU as well as the Adreno 330 GPU. So if you want me to talk a little bit more about that, perhaps check out those reviews. We'll put some links somewhere for you to do that. But if you just want to see just how quick this device is to use, we'll just flick around the operating system here. For example, loading the app drawer and things is pretty instant. If we flick back to some applications that we haven't used for a while, you'll notice that everything is essentially instant as far as smartphones go. It's by far the quickest to sort of go back in time and launch things, and scrolling and everything is absolutely astonishing performance. We've got some web pages loaded up here. If it can connect to my HSPA Plus network. Of course, there is LTE radios in here. For those of you, there are two models, the North American and the rest of world model, slightly different LTE bands, but you can get LTE on this Nexus device for the first time. But as you notice here, as we're panning around Negri Electronics, that everything is simply amazingly smooth, very quick to sort of pan in, zoom around the website, stuff like that. And this is a fairly content heavy sort of web page, so zooming in, it's extremely fast using Chrome. And if we did go into some games, which I'm not going to do, but you pretty much aren't going to drop frames. Everything runs at 60 frames per second that I can find in the market at the moment. It's really setting itself up for sort of the future of Android gaming with that Adreno 330 GPU. It's pretty much the fastest you can get. Again, you can check out benchmarks, links to those in the description below. Something we are going to talk a little bit more about though is the camera. We've got an 8 megapixel shooter on the back of this. It's a Sony Exmor RS sensor. I believe it's 1/3.2 inches as far as the size of it goes. It's also got optical image stabilization, LED flash, and it does do 1080p video recording. We've already got a sample of that up. You can check that again. Links in the description. We've got some sample shots that we're showing on the screen right now, and the performance in perfect lighting is very good. You get some fantastic shots out of this, like with any flagship high-end device. You get great shots in great lighting. But when it comes down to sort of the lighting you get indoors, the lighting in shadows, this sort of cloudy day performance, it's very inconsistent, the results that I got. I got anything from blurry images with too much grain from a high ISO, completely off white balance. Everything that sort of goes wrong with the camera has probably happened at one point using the Nexus 5's camera. I think a lot of these issues comes down to the firmware that's used on this device. It's a little bit dodgy, and I think they could probably fix it in a software update. And there's a couple of other issues that you'll see here in the camera viewfinder. I'm not sure if we can get it to show on camera, but sometimes the focusing is reasonably slow and quite hard to sort of get accurate. I've had a lot of issues sort of even in videos and stuff trying to get the focus exactly right on the shots that we want, but actually it's taking photos sort of, it's reasonably quick. It does have that sort of zero shutter lag. When you press it, it does take the photos pretty much instantly, but you see random things like it loses focus immediately after you take a photo. Stuff like this is just a little bit annoying. It has got an HDR mode in here called HDR+. It does actually do a pretty good job of making photos look a little bit better. We'll show you some comparisons. But yeah, aside from the HDR mode, there aren't actually a great number of other sort of features that you've got in the camera. You'll see we've got things such as you can change the exposure. There's a couple of settings here for white balance, sort of location, time lapse in video, stuff like that, but nothing too amazing. So that's something that Android 4.4 should have worked on, is sort of the camera interface. It's a little bit lacking compared to some of the other devices. The Galaxy S4 and HTC One immediately come to mind, but so yeah, I mean, that is sort of something to think about with the camera. It's not quite as good as other flagship devices, but it is much improved on the Nexus 4 and many of the previous Nexus devices. So I think some people will find the camera a little bit disappointing, but a lot of you will probably find it acceptable for sort of your regular everyday shots, especially if you take a few of them to get around that inconsistent camera performance. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Android 4.4 KitKat, the brand new software version that you can find out of the box on the Google Nexus 5 for the first time. So this is a pretty much brand new software iteration. I'm just going to go quickly through some of the features. The home screen is similar in style to what you've seen on previous Android devices. This is of course running stock Android, but there are a couple of differences. The top and bottom, you'll notice, is now transparent. It's gotten rid of the sort of black letterboxing sort of closed in the Android interface. Applications can also now use this sort of transparent thing for the navigation bar and also the status bar here. It makes it look a little bit more refreshing and a little bit more vibrant to use, as is the color palette that they've gone with. It's a little bit whiter, more vibrant. You notice things at the top here, such as the status icons and stuff are all now white. It looks actually pretty good. It's a refresh for the operating system to sort of have things like this. You'll notice things such as now, when we go into the settings here, that highlighting stuff is now gray as opposed to green or orange. We can sort of flick up and do stuff like this. All the sort of, long pressing and stuff is now highlighted gray. Sort of the over scrolling is gray as well, as you can see at the top there. So that's just some of the differences that have occurred in Android 4.4 on the visual side. Aside from some of the visual changes around the operating system, we're also blessed with a brand new launcher, which is in fact the Google search application. And basically what that means is Google now is completely integrated into the launcher. For example, simply flicking across to the left reveals Google Now right there and always easily accessible from your main home screen. One of the disadvantages is that you can't have apps to the left of the home screen anymore. You can only have them to the right. You can actually have unlimited home screens, which is kind of interesting, but again, only to the right of your main home screen. But flicking across does reveal Google Now. And another interesting thing that you can do is simply say, "Okay, Google," and the smartphone immediately begins searching. Pretty cool that you can simply, even without touching the device, immediately access a Google search. And it's similar to what we saw with the Moto X, in that you can sort of do a Google search from the home screens, but actually nowhere else in the operating system is that feature available, not when the screen's turned off or anything like that. It's just in the home screen, but it still is nevertheless a pretty cool feature to sort of hands-free access Google search. There's a couple of new application features to mention. First up is that Hangouts now acts as your default messaging client. It's got both SMS and instant messaging capabilities built into the one application. There are a few disadvantages that I talk about in my full review, namely conversations aren't linked between your SMS and your instant message Hangout conversation, which is a little bit weird, but nevertheless it's pretty similar in terms of functionality to the Android 4.3 messaging app. Also, what we've got here is two different photo applications. We've got both the gallery here, which shows you sort of your photos and stuff in a grid view, pulls them from Google Now and Google Plus, stuff like that. But we've also got this photo application, which is essentially the same sort of thing, except that it's the Google Now application. There's a few feature differences here, but it's kind of strange to see that there's two applications there for sort of the same thing. Apart from that, you've got all the applications that you're usually used to. There's not many changes. The phone application, for example, has taken away a lot of phone numbers and it integrates a lot of Google search features. That is pretty cool, but To be honest, a lot of these applications such as Calendar and stuff, you can actually just download straight from Google Play no matter what device you have. It's, Maps and stuff like that, Gmail, Google+, everything is all there on the Google Play Store if you really want to access it. Also included for the first time is this Quick Office application. You can also download this on Google Play, but it's the first time it's been bundled in a Nexus device. It allows you to edit documents and create new sort of Microsoft Office documents in there. Sort of a rival to Windows Phone's Microsoft Office feature, which is an interesting inclusion. And of course, Chrome is the stock browser. There's nothing much to say in that respect as far as Android 4.4 goes. There aren't too many additions to this device's settings either. A lot of the new changes to Android 4.4 are under the hood. We've got optimizations for low RAM devices. We've got a ton of new APIs. We've got some NFC features. We've got printing here that you can see and do in a number of applications, and a lot of this stuff I do discuss in the full review and isn't really worth showing because there's nothing to show actually on the operating system itself because it's all sort of APIs and stuff. One thing that they do have that I haven't shown off yet is the new immersive view, which applications can make use of. Not only have you got the sort of standard mode with the navigation pane, you'll notice that it has completely disappeared into a new mode which has no interface whatsoever on it, just the application itself. You can swipe up from the top or bottom to sort of reveal that interface again. Again, it's one of the things that applications need to implement to make that sort of useful in Android 4.4, but it's one of those new things that Google has included. At the end of the day, I'm very impressed with what you can get in the Nexus 5 for just $349 unlocked. It's actually pretty incredible that they've packed in a beautiful 5-inch display, solid internal hardware, and everything that you could want in a flagship device pretty much packed into this that you can get for a mid-range price, which is absolutely fantastic and is one of the main selling points of this device. Some of the downsides, such as a weak camera offering compared to the high-end devices and a poor battery life, which I haven't quite discussed in much detail, but it's just under what I'd like to see for flagship battery life with that 2300 mAh battery. It's a little bit concerning for power users, but aside from that, I actually found that it lasts just all day. So apart from the battery life and the camera, there's really nothing much to complain about. You're getting stock Android on this device, you're getting high-end internals, you're going to get updates as soon as they come out from Google, and the hardware itself, it feels quite nice to use this device. It's quite thin, it's quite light, it's nice to touch. It's pretty much everything that you'll want, and I really think that you should definitely consider this device up against some of the other high-end phones you can get. Compared to some of the other top-end devices you can get, like the Galaxy S4, Xperia Z1, LG G2 and HTC One, these devices do have more features than the Nexus 5, whether that's in the hardware, in the software, in the camera features, things like that. There are more features to be found if you're willing to spend hundreds of dollars more, but the great thing about the Nexus 5 is that it's at a very reasonable price. $349 is fantastic for what you're getting in this high-end phone that's essentially competing with those devices on a number of levels. So well done to Google, well done to LG for producing a pretty solid offering here with the Google Nexus 5. If you've enjoyed this review, you can subscribe to TechSpot's YouTube channel and also follow us on Twitter at TechSpot and me personally at ScorpusV. Links in the description below will take you to the full written review where you can find camera sample shots, performance analysis, and basically an in-depth look at every aspect of this device. It's well worth a read if you do have the time. Again, big thanks to Negri Electronics for sending out the Nexus 5 for me to review today. The Google Play Store is currently out of stock of Nexus 5 devices, but Negri Electronics do have some in stock if you're willing to pay a small premium. So, I'm Tim Schieser, and this has been a TechSpot video review.